All right, these are the Sony 200 to 600 millimeter lenses, and Steve and I both love them and have had them for a couple of years now.
At least, yeah.
Yes, and so we've discovered a lot of things about these lenses, and there are some things that I was realizing the other day. If you haven't had a lens like this, well, this one particularly, like the 200 to 600, there's some certain things, not really oddities, but just kind of things you need to be aware of.
Yeah, you need to get used to.
Yeah, exactly. So, like for me, I'd gone from using 50 millimeter lenses, 70 to 200, and when you pop up to a 200 to 600, there are just some things that are different. You ready for this?
All set.
All set? You want me to go first?
Go first.
Okay. Minimum focal distance, and this obviously is in the specs, so you'll know that, but sometimes it's hard to get used to that because maybe you're focused on something far and then they come and like a bird lands closer to you on a fence and suddenly you can't focus anymore because they're just too close. So that's one thing to look at when you get like a 200 to 600 or a long zoom is your minimum focal distance. And I don't remember what this one is. I'll put it on the screen. I'll look it up in the specs, but it's further than you think.
Yeah, probably a couple meters at least, maybe 3.
I think it might be 3 meters is the closest. Well,
2.4 actually.
2.4, so just around 10 feet. So sometimes what happens is things are going great and then like a little brown bird hops right there and you just can't focus. You have to step back, and it gets even worse when you try to put a teleconverter on these.
Yeah.
So minimum focal distance is something you'll have to get used to when you get this camera. So just keep that in mind when you're scouting locations. All right, Steve, take away number 2.
Haze.
Yeah.
This is especially, I've noticed it out on the plains of eastern Colorado when I'm shooting basically objects or things that are really far away. My first time I noticed it, I was photographing a building, probably 3-4 miles away. And the edges of the building were moving back and forth. And that's from the heat waves coming up off the ground. And it mixes the air. And so the light rays move as they get to your camera. Also over ice, I see the same thing. Over trying to photograph birds on ice. So you need to be kind of aware of some of the restrictions because you are shooting over such large distances. There are other considerations that need to be taken into account.
Yeah, agreed. And because, I mean, we're getting this lens because we want that farther reach, and that farther reach is going to go over something. And you especially notice this if you're lower to the ground, really hot, really cold, like he was saying. Sometimes if you use your car as a shield, that'll have it, but that'll be with any lens. But this one, we've talked about haze in the past, but it's really something you need to take into account with these longer lenses.
Yeah, it's not so much haze as...
like atmosphere. Right? Distortion, atmospheric distortion.
Yeah.
Sorry. Distortion. You know what I'm talking about. So that's a big one to account for when you first get this lens and you're going out. If you have things that are further away, that could be, and you're having a hard time with focusing, that could be a problem.
Yeah, it'll be difficult to get a really sharp image sometimes.
Yeah.
If you've done any astronomy, you're very familiar with this problem.
True. Okay. The third thing is the aperture range. This is not a G Master lens like everybody in the comments always points out to us. So it's not a 2.8, but this has a variable aperture. So it is 5.6 to 6.3. So when you're zoomed all the way into 600, your maximum, your widest aperture is going to be 6.3. And that could be a little bit disappointing if you're coming from an aperture range that's wider. So keep that in mind.
It gets darker faster.
Yeah. And when you put a teleconverter on there, it goes to like F9,
yeah,
9 to 11, somewhere in there. So be careful when you're out and about with light levels. And the aperture range is going to be just something you have to get used to. You want to do the next one?
Yeah. Cropping and sharpness. Well, one of the things with this lens is you can shoot much farther objects which are much farther away, birds, etc., and so forth. There's birds especially noticeable. And you think, well, I can just crop in. It depends on your camera.
Yes.
And you can get an image of a bird, for instance, that looks sharp in the camera, and by the time you crop in, you'll find that you're very limited as to how close you can crop in. 24 or 28 megapixels does not give you the options. I've got the A7R4 here, which gives me 60 megapixels, which lets me get in a little bit closer, but I still run into that issue if I want to crop in too close. And the lens allows me to get an image that would normally be fairly sharp, but then the megapixels on the camera sensor actually restrict how sharp I can get it. So I'm pushing the sensor more than it was designed to be pushed.
Yeah, and I'm shooting with the A1, which is 50 pixels. And what happens is you get really excited when you first get this lens. And you're like, woohoo, wow, I can really zoom in on that subject. And in the viewfinder, when you're shooting it at the time, you're seeing the action and all this, and you get home and you realize, oh, well, it's zoomed in, but it's still this big. And you're like, oh, but I have this big lens, I should be able to crop in. So just one of those things, in your excitement, you might notice that too. And there is just the restriction like you would have on any lens. So it's obviously the combo that you have with the camera you have, but
and what you're trying to do with it.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind. You're gonna be really excited, but don't be too disappointed in that. That's just a normal thing. Something else to keep in mind is it's actually fairly heavy. This is pretty heavy. I want to say, was it 5 pounds?
It's 5 pounds.
It's a 5-pound lens, which is like a bag of flour, right? So imagine holding a bag of flour like this for a while.
Yeah, basically arm's length type thing.
Well, yeah. Unless you're on a tripod, which if you know me at all, I don't like tripods. And they're cumbersome to use for wildlife anyway, because a lot of us get these for wildlife. And so it's difficult for me to shoot on a tripod for wildlife, especially birds, anything like moving at all. I just don't like the restriction, but then my arms get real tired real fast. Some people have mentioned monopods. They kind of get in the way for me too, but that could be an option. But keep in mind when you get this, it's going to be heavier than you expect, for sure. And that can affect a lot of things.
Yeah, start lifting them weights.
Lifting the weights, that's right. Yep. So that can affect your focus. It can affect your shutter speed that you can use if you're not using a tripod. So just keep in mind that when you first get this, you're going to be real excited to go out and your arm is going to hurt if you're not on a tripod. That first couple of times, you're like, wow, what have I done? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or if you're waiting for that moment and you just get it all lined up and it takes 3 or 4 minutes before the critter does whatever you're waiting for it to do, or longer. Yeah, you'll get a little tired.
Yeah, so I'm good at finding fence posts, stumps, and rocks to help prop me up.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh, this. So the next one kind of goes around with the sharpness and cropping.
Overextending your capabilities would be one way. Mm-hmm. You think you can, and this is especially noticeable with tracking focus.
This is a focusing tip.
You will stretch the abilities of the lens to follow, or the camera to follow what you're looking at. In other words, it'll be too far away for the focus to really track. A very, very small item in your lens, small image. And even then, you'll run into the problem with cropping in on it. Basically, the lens is so good at what it does that you're going to push it past practical limits. And you'll be taking photos of this, basically a dot with wings, for instance, for birds, and thinking you can actually pull that up and crop in close enough. And no, it'll have trouble focusing that far out, and then you can't blow it up, and then you're frustrated.
It's a similar tip to the cropping one, but I think it's another thing where we get really excited, and we're bringing this up because I know it's obvious. I know it sounds really obvious, but we were so excited when we first got these. We thought, okay, the focus has locked on that bird way over there, and it should be great. No,
No,
It's still too far.
Yeah.
Okay. So sometimes you're going to want to push it a lot further, thinking, sure, I've got all the pickles. I got this lens. Let's go. But just keep in mind, it's not a miracle worker. It's not a $13,000 lens. It's this one. So, and even those lenses, you can only do so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You kind of get, after a while, you can look at it something and go, no, that's just too far out.
It's just too far or too dark, like we were talking with Aperture. And that's when all your other skills as a wildlife photographer come in handy. We've done a whole video on this channel, at least one, on tips for photographing wildlife. And that's where your other skills are going to have to come in handy. You can't rely on everything with your equipment, but that's in a different video. So number 7 is the wear on your camera body. And sometimes people in the comments here have to remind me to not hold this lens and camera combo by the camera. Please heed their warnings and learn from our mistakes, because you really need to be holding it either with like a camera strap on the lens or from the lens foot or on a tripod.
Yeah.
Do not hold it from the camera, because all that weight, it will wear on the collar, the connection.
Yeah. It won't lock as nicely.
Oh my
and if you really yank on the camera when you pick it up, you just grab it on the
Camera body.
camera body and pull it up really fast, you can actually end up bending the locking collar. Because, I've done it.
Yeah. Yeah. So be really, really careful. This is that 5-pound lens, right? And it's going on this little camera body. And that collar is only so big. And it has all these little delicate connection points. And I know that from the comments that a lot of you have a little bit of play in your lens right there. So be super careful of that connection. That's not something you probably won't think of when you first buy this, but always carry it by the lens.
And there are actually warnings in the quick setup sheet and et cetera to not pick it up by the camera. So,
yeah. All of that said, our 8th thing that you should be considering is
the price.
It's pretty amazing.
For what you pay for, I think this lens delivers much more than you would think at that price level. It's pretty good, and I'm still more than happy to have paid that for this lens. I would really like the f4 600 millimeter, but that's like what, $12,000–$13,000?
Yeah.
And this is 2.
And it's under 2 sometimes now.
Yeah, you can get it for 19 sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes 19 $100 US dollars.
So, and it's pretty sharp to start, so.
And it's going to really get you that reach that you're just not going to get with your, 7200 or any of those. Even with the 2.8, I get it that this is not a G Master, but for 2,000 and under,
it's worth every penny.
I really think so.
Yeah,
it really can take you, especially if you're maybe a super beginner in wildlife photography. We're not like incredibly experienced, but it gives you that little bit of extra reach, and it gives the animals that space if you're using this for wildlife. So I think it's all around pretty amazing for the price.
No, more than a little bit extra reach.
True. Okay, it's a lot of extra reach. It's going to feel amazing when you're like, what? This lens is totally worth it. So those are just some things that we thought you might want to know that are very specific to this lens, and especially to a bigger lens if this is especially the first time you've had one.
Yeah.
And I hope this helps with your purchasing decision if this is something you want to buy. One of the things we always say is rent things if you're not quite sure. So I would suggest finding a place to rent it if you're really on the fence about it, and then just really put it through the paces of what you normally photograph.
Yeah.
But so don't just take our word for it. Try it out, okay? Or get a good return policy. But we have actually loved these. We've taken them out many, 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 many times over the last couple of years and love it. And so check out all the other videos we have about this lens in the playlist. It's going to come up on the end screen here. If you have questions that we don't answer, put them in the comments. We'd love to hear about that. If you are a follower of the channel and you want a little bit of behind the scenes, we have a join button now right here on the YouTube. It's very inexpensive, like $3. It helps us with our coffee and gas to do all of these videos.
Yeah, and we post behind the scenes and what we have coming up there.
Yeah.
So,
It's fun.
yeah.
Nice, raw, like here we are, here's some things going on, and we answer some questions that members ask. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, well, we heard a hawk earlier. We got to go see if we can find it. Yeah. All right. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
See ya.
Bye.